Captain Dwayne Blackwood, Chaplain, Senior NCOs, Warrant Officers, Senior NCOs, Junior NCOs. I am Lieutenant Giovanni Franklin, and I'll be your moderator for today. Good morning and welcome. The Chaplaincy and Welfare Department has as its mandate to support command. We do this by providing the support necessary to nurture the spiritual, emotional, and social well-being of each soldier so that the soldier is fit to fight, fit for life, and fit for his or her family. In order to accomplish this, we have been doing, among other things, regular Padre Hour sessions with each formation, as well as conducting lecture and discussion series that deals with personal and professional development, as well as mental health support. World Mental Health Day, sponsored by the World Health Organization, is observed on October 10th each year. The overall objective of raising awareness on mental health issues around the world and mobilizing efforts in support of mental health. The Jamaica Defense Force, through a collaboration of the Chaplaincy and Welfare Department and the Health Services Corps, is hosting a week of activities to highlight the importance of mental health. The week of activities began with a church service at the Garza Church on October 3rd, 2021. Mental health is essential for a person's overall health. According to the World Health Organization, there is no health without mental health. Mental health is important and cannot be ignored. Prevention works, treatment is effective, and people can recover from mental disorders and live full and productive lives. Mental health and functioning can be enhanced and quality of life preserved. The focus of today's presentation is sexual abuse, implication for mental health. Sexual assault refers to sexual behavior that occurs without clear consent of the victim. These include attempted rape, fondling or unwanted sexual touching, forcing a victim to perform sexual acts such as oral sex or penetrating the perpetrator's body, and penetration of the victim's body, rape. This presentation serves to continue to create awareness about the effects of sexual trauma, in particular the short and long-term effects on victims' mental health. It is hoped that through this lecture, service members will understand that sexual violence takes several forms, all of which may have a profound impact on our life. Surviving an act of sexual violence takes strength, courage, and skill. Service members, just like every human being, have the right to decide when and how you engage in sexual activity. No one deserves to be a victim of sexual abuse. If you have been sexually assaulted, the assault was not your fault. We encourage service members to foster a culture of care and support for each other as we continue to focus on soldiers who are fit for the fight, fit for life, and fit for his or her family. This morning, our guest presenter is Dr. Karen Carpenter. Dr. Carpenter is the head of the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona. She's a Florida Board certified clinical sexologist and licensed counseling psychologist in Jamaica. She has over 20 years experience in working with clients internationally on sex and relationship issues through face-to-face and online sessions. She hosts Love and Sex on Facebook and is the guest expert on issues of human sexuality and interpersonal relationships. She is the director of free public sexology clinic at the University Hospital of the West Indies. She is also an author of books such as Love and Sex, The Basics, Questioning Caribbean and Jewish Identity, editor, Interweaving Tapestries of Sexuality and Culture, and she's also a co-author of Language, Race, and the Global Jamaica. This morning, I invite you to make welcome our guest presenter, Dr. Karen Carpenter.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Good morning. Are you hearing me clearly? Yes, ma'am. Wonderful. I'm a bit stuffy, so bear with me, but I could not miss this occasion. I'm really pleased to have been invited to be with you this morning. Organizations like the JDF and the JCF are very dear to my heart because people who give national service are the people who keep this country going. So you can't imagine, I'm more pleased than you are that I'm here today. The topic we're going to look at is a difficult one, but I hope that I can take you through some of the basics and then leave a little time for you to be able to ask a couple of questions, if that's okay. All right? So let's start with looking at what we're talking about today. So you got a definition already of what sexual abuse is, and I think most of us have some idea of what sexual abuse is. Here are some of the categories that come under sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse, yes? Domestic violence within the sexual act, interpersonal violence, and I'm going to get my glasses. Please excuse me. I've been vain. So I only use them for reading, so I wasn't aware I didn't have them on. Right. So interpersonal violence between two or more persons, and of course, we have partner abuse, which we know about, physical abuse and neglect, and sexual assault and rape. So all of these come under the rubric of sexual abuse. There's a challenge when we're dealing with different populations, and by that we mean different age groups, because the way we decide whether or not sexual abuse has taken place depends on exactly what the definition told you, the person's ability to consent. So children, and by the UN definition, children are under 18, do not have the ability to consent. So you will find that the activities that we put under that umbrella of sexual abuse for children is much broader than the activities for adults, because adults can consent. So an adult may have consented to certain touches or kissing or petting or necking, but when it came to penetration, they did not consent. So we would focus on what they didn't consent to. A child cannot consent to any of those things. So for children, the scope of what we think about when we think about sexual abuse is very broad, and it can include things like priming. Most sexual abusers prime children for abuse. So what they do is that they become friendly with the child. They're very nice to the child. They pay special attention to the child. They give gifts to the child. Come and sit on my lap. Come and do this special task with me. So you find most sexual abusers of children don't hate children. They love children. But they love children in a sexual way. And this is what we have to get used to. That it's not going to be a boogeyman wearing a dark coat with a scraggly beard and looking all horrible. It's going to be that gentle person that you trust very much with your child, the uncle, the aunt, etc., who has access. Because the main thing for the sexual abuser is access. Sexual abusers of children are often what we call ebophiles. Where's my budding sex therapist? I want her to get all of this information. An ebophile is someone who's attracted to a child who who has not yet reached adolescence. So they genuinely want to engage in a sexual relationship with someone that doesn't present as an adult. Yes? An ebophile. So don't worry that a child doesn't have breasts yet, or hasn't filled out yet, or don't have any hair in the genitals. And we're all over 18, you know, I have to speak frankly, yes? Don't worry about that part. You're thinking that a child is not attractive to the perpetrator because they don't have any of the womanly features. That is actually very attractive to a pedophile because they don't want to engage with a woman. They want to engage with someone who's not yet a woman. So they will generally engage with a child under the age of 13. Fewer children are molested between 13 and 15, 13 and 17, than 13 and under. Molestation starts very, very early, and it's not restricted to girls, and it's not restricted to men. It is mostly men because of power relations, but it is not only men, and we need to talk about that a little bit more. So who are we talking about? People who have past experiences, people who have suffered abuse, people who have been in relationships that are abusive and are often referred to as victims or survivors. I prefer the term survivors, yes? Because if you've come through it at all, you're a survivor. Now, how you survive and whether you thrive depends on the help that you get. Okay. The reason we have situations of abuse, and it can be an abuse of power, even within the workplace, but specifically sexual abuse, is because the power dynamic between the two persons is not equal. Whenever one person or group has more power than another person or group, the danger of abuse increases. So you can imagine with children and adults, or children and older teens, the older person has more power than the younger person. With a man and a woman, if they're of relative same age and body size, the man is going to be 72% more body mass than the woman. So unless she's trained by the JDF or the JCF to defend herself, she's not likely to be able to overpower a bigger, larger, bulkier person. And so the one with the more power is going to be the one who's in a situation to abuse. Now, naturally, men are also abused. So in those instances, it's usually a female that has more power than the man. And that's usually a female adult and a male child. And we have those cases as well. Yes, so you see the difference in power. This female adult who is wanting sexual favors, and she uses a child who can't either decide for themselves or resist or disobey. Okay. Okay, so when significant others are violent or abusive, the victim might feel fearful. Fear is the biggest word we hear in sexual abuse. But one of the words that I notice I haven't included on these slides, which I really want us to remember, is shame. Not only do you feel fearful, you actually feel ashamed. Here we've said you feel dirty. You can't cope. You become traumatized. And especially if the act is a repeated act over time. Most of the patients that I see have been abused very early, and the act has been repeated over time. And oddly enough, parents, guardians, etc., most of the times don't know. They really don't know. And I think we have to have more comprehensive services when we get into the taking on the case for the child. And that's something I'm going to be encouraging the CDA to do, which is to look at the entire family unit when we talk about sexual abuse, not just the survivor. Because that parent is traumatized to learn the information. That parent is distraught. They feel, you know, I should have been able to protect my child. I should have known. I should have seen the signs. Why didn't I think that uncle was doing A, B, or C? Yes? So it's very hard for a parent to cope with. And then we have to think about the safety of all the members of the family. Okay. The efforts to survive might lead to psychological trauma over time. And that is because the trauma is revisited in the mind of the survivor. It doesn't just happen once to them. They are constantly ruminating, When you went to high school, you heard about rumens, that cows have rumens. And if any of you come from the farms, you know, cows have rumens in their stomach because they regurgitate their food. So rumination is a regurgitation of thoughts. The mind keeps obsessing about the thought. And each time something happens that reminds them about this thought, they get jumpy, they get traumatized, and they're re-triggered, as we call it. There's a strong association with sexual abuse and mental health. One, because sex itself is treated as a taboo topic. In cultures where sex is treated as something that you whisper about, you hide about, you susu about, like Jamaica, then you find that the trauma is even greater because people don't feel they can speak out. Nobody talks about sex, so worse, how can you say that uncle touched you or auntie made you do X, Y, or Z? You're not able to say those things because you never hear your parents say the word sex. They've never mentioned the word sex to you. The only thing they say is you mustn't get pregnant. Nobody bring no belly come my yard, you know, right? That's an oblique reference to sex. Okay, so where we have taboos about talking about sex, sexual abuse goes underground more. We hear less of it. And the impact on the mental health creates morbidities. 37% of the people who had experienced extensive sexual abuse ended up with psychological trauma. The people we see at the clinic, at the hospital, are already suffering from psychological trauma. And that starts from children to adults. And I'm going to share with you the other group that we see, which might surprise you. So in Jamaica, sexual abuse has been part of the cultural norm. This cultural norm of adults breaking in a child that they're providing for, multiple fathers in a home where the children may not all be theirs, and therefore the ones who are not theirs biologically become prey because they're not related to them. But even the ones who are their biological children become prey because they feel that they're putting the food on the table, therefore they can take back the food by way of sex. Yes? And this is a pervasive problem. First sexual intercourse for most Jamaican females has been through force. I'm going to repeat that. First sexual intercourse for most Jamaican females occurs through force. They were not ready, they weren't old enough, they felt pressure, or they were physically forced. And it's a serious matter because in Jamaica, the age of first sex is 15 years. There are countries that have lower levels than us. So we're not shocking by having a 15-year age of initiation. So if most, I think the spray killed it. Okay, good. Is this better? Yes. So if most 15-year-olds in the country already have had sex, and most 15-year-olds in the country had sex by force, it means we're dealing with a population that's highly traumatized. And let me emphasize again, this does not mean girls only. Boys in Jamaica are initiated by the time they're 14. And many are initiated by the time they're 9, 8, 10 by an older female who, in the definition of rape that we need to come to understand, have been raped. Our definition legally of rape is a penis entering a vagina, but that is not what rape really is. Rape is forcefully having sex with another person. Most 9, 8, and 7-year-olds who are initiated don't have the power to say no, aren't aware of what is going to happen the first time it happens, and because the body is designed to experience pleasure through sexual activity, just as the body is designed to experience pleasure through eating. Exercise gives you pleasure as well. The adrenaline goes up. We cannot sort out in our minds the natural bodily response to the rape act and the fact that you're being forced. So it's very confusing for that young child that there's any pleasure at all, especially for the boy child, that he has an erection, that he's aroused, and at the same time he's fearful. So imagine having arousal and fear at the same time. That's a very confusing feeling, you know. There's a saying that says that you can't go east and west at the same time. That's the mind going east and west at the same time. The child is feeling the arousal that they're unaccustomed to, feels exciting, and at the same time they know that this should not be happening. Something inside them is telling them this should not be happening, and it has long-term effects. I see men at 60 who are abused at 6 who are still suffering the effects. So we have to think about that. Okay, so between January and June 2020, the National Children's Registry registered over 1,000 cases of sexual abuse for children. And I believe the more recent figures are closer to 2,000 now, because during COVID, the cases went underground. Why? People were on lockdown with the perpetrators. They can't text, they can't phone, they can't see their little girlfriend or the person at work that they could tell something to. And so now, in fact, we're doing studies coming up very soon to try and uncover what's been happening in the home. Where we have seen an increase, though, is in pediatric cases. So in the hospitals, the victims of abuse, the survivors of abuse who have been traumatized sufficiently to need hospital care, note what I'm saying, there are others who have not been sufficiently traumatized to need a hospital. They're in the homes, and nobody knows. The ones who have a medical problem from the trauma are increasing. So we've seen a 70% increase in the pediatric wards in Jamaica of child sexual abuse. So that means that the cases have gone up by 70% in children at minimum. Okay. So the long-term consequences, the anger, the fear again, but there's also shame. And I don't know if we could get that slide a little bigger so we can see the boxes. There's sleep disturbance, sleep deprivation. There is a recurring trauma. There's an inability to cope and to trust others. It's very difficult to trust other people when the people in your home are the perpetrators of the harm. It's extremely difficult to trust when you can't be safe at home. So these are some of the things that we suffer as a result of that trauma. We have underlying issues as well of anxiety. I see a lot of cases that come in and the person says, I'm suffering from anxiety. And as you go on and you go on and you probe, you find that anxiety is rooted in some kind of childhood trauma. I had just very recently, in the last year, so many cases. Very recently in the last year, I had a young man who had just entered high school. He was somewhat learning disabled, slightly, and his grandmother brought him to me. And the reason she brought him was because the perpetrator had come back to live in the yard, you know, the tenement yard that they were living in. The child had gone to the bathroom for something to shower. So tenement yards is a shared shower. The male person who abused him was in the shower, took advantage of him in the shower when he was about 10 years old. It was reported, the grandmother took it to the whole extent, and I mean, I really applaud her. Not a highly literate woman, but she did every single thing she could. She went to court, she did everything. An injunction was served on him, he was taken in, he was arrested, served time, came out, and went to another district where he abused another child. And because he had abused a child and they were looking for him, to harm him obviously, he returned to the place where this child lived. And this is common in Jamaica. So this little young man now, every day, is seeing the man who had raped him. That's very traumatizing for a child. How do you make the child safe? And when I say to the grandmother, what other family members do you have? Is there somewhere else he can live? She has no one. She's braving up herself to come to the hospital at all, hoping that we can help her. And she's afraid to say anything to the man because she's afraid of reprisals from his family. It's a tough world. And there's no place for kids like this except a foster home. And this grandmother is afraid that she doesn't want her grandson to go into a foster home when she's still alive. She wants to be able to give the primary care. And that situation continues. So the only thing we can do is to report him again to CDA. and have them removing from the premises. But it doesn't solve the problem, because wherever he is, there's a problem. Yeah? He's not going to stop. Here are some of the things that we look at when we're looking at a case, and I've done this in terms of a tree, what we call a respond tree. If you look at the roots of the tree, you can see some of the things that give rise to the problems that we experience in the branches and the leaves. So we have the physical abuse, we have the sexual abuse, we have emotional abuse, and that gives rise to a number of things. So this is an easy way of remembering it, right? So you can see the different things. You've seen the yellow labels tell you what it is that each of those things is: the emotions, the psychological response, the anxiety, yeah, the depression, PTSD, which we hear a lot about now, post-traumatic stress disorder, or post-traumatic stress syndrome. So all of these things give rise over time as the tree grows to these long-term effects. It also affects our relationship with our partners. So in my private practice, and sometimes in the clinic I see more severe cases. In the private practice, often when someone comes in and they're having a problem receiving intercourse, enjoying sexual contact, maintaining and gaining an erection, etc., I have to probe for their history. And often you'll find that there's been sexual abuse. Often you find that every time the partner approaches them, even though the partner is good to them and they have a good relationship, they can't function, male and female alike. And this is the traumatizing effect of that PTSD. Yes? I had one client, very successfully we worked together. I think she was with me for about a year in the clinic. And she had been abused as a child. Lovely young lady, working a good job, very sort of withdrawn, quiet young lady. And over the year, we worked on her becoming more receptive to her partner. They wanted to get engaged, they wanted to get married, and she just couldn't receive any kind of touch. Once it got below the waist, it was a problem, yeah? And it took a very long time, but we managed to get there over a year of work. She was diligent with it, and I was persistent with her. But every time we approach a traumatizing event, because in the work I do, we revisit the trauma in order to move beyond the trauma. Now, not everyone works in that way. There are different modalities that we use. And for me, once the client says, I can't say anything else, I have to stop. So it took a very long time to get the story out, and took a very long time to revisit each aspect of it, and for her to realize that she didn't have any agency. There was nothing she could have done. One of the most shocking cases I've had is a woman who was raped 26 times throughout her life. She was orphaned very early, and you know Jamaicans say a batter, and she battered from family member to family member. She was abducted, she was in the countryside, abducted, gang raped, thrown out on the road 26 times. Imagine what that does to your mind. So it's a real problem in this country. Okay, ways of trying to cope. Disassociation. When we disassociate, it's kind of like what we call split personality disorder. It's called dissociative disorder. So you split your mind in two because you can't go east and west at the same time. One part of you goes east and one part of you goes west. And you stop being one person, you become more than one person. Split personality disorder, dissociative disorder. And so the part of you that copes is often a different personality, a different identity, has a different name, and the part of you that can't cope is the part of you that went through the trauma. And you can disassociate to several personalities. So there's a lot of disassociation. It happened to someone else. It didn't happen to me. And that person will speak about the incident in the third person. So they'll say, well, you know, Karen was in the bathroom and then uncle came in and he did this to Karen. But you say to them, well, who are you? They're not going to answer Karen. Yeah? It's a serious breaking of the mind. Avoiding relationships. Often these persons will end up in a church. I get a lot of cases from the church of vaginismus, the inability to receive penetration of any kind. And often the church is a banner, it's a cloak, it's a hiding place because you can use religion and religious practice to avoid relationships. You can go into the church and you can hide safely and you get applauded for not having sex and not having a boyfriend. And then when you do find your partner and you start to engage, you're unable to engage. Yes? Happens all the time. You get into intense relationships, and that's another thing that we're going to look at in terms of a disorder. Your relationships are dramatic. They're out of control. You're in love today and tomorrow you're out of love. And every day is a drama. And every day you have a problem. Because what's happening there is a disorder that we're going to talk about on the next slide. You keep busy. You keep distracted. You hyper. There's no time when you can be quiet, because you associate being quiet with the memory. And you start ruminating when you're quiet. You self-medicate with drugs. I think some of us self-medicate with religion. We hide in the religion and we use the religious verses to self-medicate. Yeah? So we can use drugs, we can use alcohol, we can use any escape that will allow us not to have to deal with it. You also self-harm. One of the things that I see very often is young women in particular with razor marks across their hands, across their body, across their necks, across their entire body. I remember a couple brought me their twins at a clinic, and a young lady had been brought in because she was acting out, we call it, having difficulties. And her parents reported that she had been cutting. And when I asked the parents if she'd cut lately, they said no. And they showed me that the scars were dried up. So when we went into the consulting room, I said to her, show me where you cut this morning. That's how a psychologist asks a question. I'm not asking you if you cut this morning. Show me where you cut this morning. And she opened her t-shirt and she showed me outside of the bra line where she'd been cutting this morning. I know coming to therapy is going to be a high anxiety issue for her. I know that although the parents think they're doing the best for her, and they are, she's not going to want to come. She doesn't want to tell me about the abuse. She doesn't want to revisit it. So she must be anxious. So I'm not buying this story that the last cutting was a week ago when that's what you reported, that you caught her cutting. She cut that morning, because what they do is that they inflict pain on themselves, and the pain that they inflict on themselves is greater than the psychological pain that they're experiencing, and it calms them down. Think about when you exercise, when you do your drills, when you do anything that's hard for you. If you can overcome something harder than what you overcame before, you actually feel good about what you overcame before. You say, yes, I reached the next level. And that's what the cutting does. It's a way of letting go of the pain. So if I can inflict a greater pain on myself than the perpetrator inflicted on me, I'm in control. I'm okay. So that takes a long time to get over. And then somatization. Somatization simply means in our bodies we feel as if we've got a blow or heat or your head swelling, or when you think about the incident. So you're not really getting a physical blow, but because you're somatizing it, then the body reacts to the mention of the incident as if you're being physically hit, or as if you're, about to faint. That's somatization. Yeah. Okay. And watchfulness. But the watchfulness occurs, on both parts. Watchfulness is what the survivor does. Always looking around, always looking for danger, always skittish. Yes? And then vigilance is what the perpetrator does. The perpetrator always has their eye on the victim, because they want to make sure that the victim is not talking and not telling anybody. So they will show an unusual interest in the victim. And they'll know everything about what the victim is doing. And if it's happening in the home, they're searching the phone, they're looking at the WhatsApp, they're pinning you, etc. So that's what we call vigilance. And you will be familiar with that word in the army. And then the victim is watchful. They have very poor sleep. I know domestic abuse cases where the man is beating the woman while she's asleep. So the woman cannot sleep. Yes? So it's really crazy. Okay, so some common responses, here they are. You can just read. I tend to not read from slides, but I expand on it for you. So you notice the disorders. Bipolar disorder is a common result, right? Borderline personality disorder is the one I want to point out, because that is the most common one we see from survivors of abuse. And borderline personality disorder is a way of coping with uncertain situations in childhood. Borderline personality disorder has as its features a kind of, how do I explain to you? Inconsistency. Borderline personality, here this is a post-traumatic one. I'll do the borderline one after. So here are the signs of post-traumatic stress. But let's look at borderline, because that's the one we see most, right? In a borderline personality, what it means is that the person doesn't have a true personality. They're on the border of all the personality disorders. They will often adapt to whatever the person they're with wants, and they're always reading you, that watchfulness, to see what will please you. Who do I have to be so that you won't harm me anymore, right? They're impulsive, they're inconsistent, their emotions are very unreliable. You don't know when they're going to be happy, when they're going to be sad. I had one borderline who managed, and let me explain. Academic achievement and mental health problems are not related all the time. You can have a very bright person who does well academically and has a serious mental health problem, okay? So don't always think that because the person is doing well in school, that they're not traumatized. It's one of those things that we have in our minds that mad people can't do well in school. It's not true. Okay, why don't children tell? Some of those answers we know. Yes, they're threatened, they're afraid, they've been told not to tell. We don't talk about sex in the home, so how are they going to come and tell you that uncle had sex with them? How are they going to tell you that? You've told them nothing about their bodies and nothing about sex, and we're treating sex as if it's the biggest problem in the world. It is not, but we have made it into a problem because we're hiding and lying about it. Parents who don't talk about sex with their kids clearly have no information about sex. So why would they come to you? You don't know anything. So these are some of the reasons why kids don't tell. And why adults don't tell? Same reasons as children. But additionally, they feel ashamed. They have fear, they feel ashamed, they think that they're not normal. And here's one of the problems that goes through the adult's mind. Will I become an abuser myself? People who are abused often become abusers. People who are abused and don't receive treatment often become abusers. Because unless they can resolve the trauma, they see the behavior that they were put through as relatively normal. And they usually abuse. And they reoffend very often. Yes? So there's a lot of fear on the adult's part that they will be rejected, people won't see them as normal, they'll be seen as dirty, there's shame, etc. Reasons why men don't tell. Difficult to talk about their emotions. I don't believe that it's difficult for men to talk about their emotions. At the moment, I have more male clients than I have female clients. And clients will come in as a couple and the wife will tell me, oh, he doesn't talk, he doesn't say anything, I can't get anything out of him. And I say, fine. And he comes in and 2 hours later, I can't get him to stop talking. For people to talk, you have to listen. For people to talk, you have to listen. You also have to not judge. So they must feel that whatever they have to say, no matter how horrible it is, you're not going to judge them. And often, we judge men very harshly because our standards for them are impossible. There's no one man that can achieve all the standards that we have for a man. It's like when you read the Bible and you read about a good woman. Was it Psalm 30 or something like that? The good wife works tirelessly, toils into the night. That poor woman should have to be a robot. Well, our expectations of men are somewhat unrealistic if we want them to be humane. So we have to think about that. They don't want to be humiliated. They don't want to go to court. They don't want to be told that they're gay. They don't want to be told that you're not man enough, that's why it happened to you. Because often men are also abused by men. Not just by men, but women as well. Most of my male clients who have been abused by women, and have been abused as children, and have been abused by someone in their 20s to 30. That's the age of the perpetrator. Usually they start perpetrating between teenage and about 30. That's the biggest age group of offenders, and they continue throughout their lives, right? Okay, so they also believe that they're the only person this has happened to, and they caused it. It's something about them that caused a person to do what they did. So we have to provide support for survivors. We have to think about how they can get help from friends and family. Not all survivors will want to go to therapy. Not all survivors need to go to therapy. And not all survivors will benefit from therapy, because if they're resistant to the therapeutic measures, then you're not going to get anywhere with them. As a therapist, you're there as a wall for them to bounce their ideas off. You don't give advice, you don't tell them what to do. So when they're unwilling to open up, there's nothing you can do. Yeah? They have to be honest with you in order for you to help them. Okay. And we can look at all the self-help and self-support things first, and then the highest rung of that assistance would be therapy, of course. And therapy is often long-term. Less than a year is not usually useful. So some questions that you can ask when someone discloses. Are you safe to go home? Is it okay to go home? Do you need to go somewhere else? That's the first question I ask. Where is a safe place that you can be tonight? Forget about tomorrow or the night after. Tonight. Do you have a friend, family member, somebody I can call? Is there a number that you can reach and you can get some help? The second thing I'm going to ask is there a family member who your partner respects? Because you may need an intervention. If you have to go home, if there's no other safe place, then your father, your brother, your member of your family who the person respects should come with you and help you to intervene. Because once the person has told, it makes it less likely that the offender will reoffend. Yes? You have to tell. Okay. What do you think might happen? Have they hurt the children? What help do you need to keep safe? What people, places do you need to keep safe? Then we also do some very practical things. A list of telephone numbers that you can reach out to. People who will be your SOS. That if you ping them, if you send them SOS message, if you ring the phone and you can't talk and you leave the phone open, they're going to respond. Because you develop a way of them rescuing, right? They're going to come to your house, they're going to intervene, they're going to call the police, they're going to do something, right? So you make some of those plans so the person's safety is increased. Okay, as I said, a list of names. Ask friends if you can contact them. Recently I had a woman who has been abused for the last 18 years in her marriage. And she was planning her escape, literally. And she found a friend who had helped one other person who had been physically abused. And that woman became her escape route. And it was an elaborate plan that they had to devise in order to not alert the man to the fact that she had to leave. And it's really alarming. When you see the perpetrators, which is the next thing I want to talk about, it's alarming. Because perpetrators come back to my office and they come back seeking help. Not help as in they want to stop perpetrating, but they want your assistance because they have a story as to why they had to beat up the person or why they attacked the person. Yeah? It really is hard work. It's not for the faint-hearted, believe me, because you're sitting there in disbelief at what the person is telling you. What can we do after today? If you see something, say something. If you see something, say something. Don't keep it quiet. The CDA has a registry, and you can send an email anonymously, you can call anonymously, and the new number that's been put out is 211 for children, so that children have an easy number that they can call if something happens to them. So I'm going to close with this one thing. Perpetrators. We focus all of our attention on the survivors and victims. It will never stop unless we focus attention on the perpetrators. We must develop therapeutic measures for the perpetrators. We must develop methods that are world-class best practices for dealing with perpetrators. Because whatever sentencing is done, it is never sufficient to keep a perpetrator from reoffending. And most victims do not take the court case through to the end. That means that the perpetrator is out again on the street molesting another child or an adult. Yes? And perpetrators are barefaced, bold-faced. Don't think a perpetrator is going to be crying into their handkerchief saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's not the way they appear. And that's why it's frightening in therapy when you're dealing with a perpetrator, because they're dry-eyed. And they're telling you why it happened and how the child enticed them and how the parent allowed it, etc., etc. One of the cases I most recently dealt with, and when I was training, one of the areas that I said I'd never work in is pedophilia. Because you're asked to think about if you have any qualms, any queasiness about the various things we do as sex therapists. And I've got to the point, now that I'm old and gray, where I am realizing that somebody has to work with them. So this has been an area of focus for me over the last 3 years or so. How do we work with perpetrators? And I see perpetrators. The last one walked in to the clinic and asked for help, but he wanted help with dealing with the fact that he was being taken to court. Here's how he told the story. And this is research, it's not a private client, and we do ask him to sign research forms. Here's how he told the story. He said, well, I get in a little trouble. So I said, what's the trouble? Well, it seems like I have to go to court. What do you have to go to court for? Well, it's really my niece, you know, it's really my niece. What, is your niece going to court? No, I have to go to court about my niece. Something happened to your niece? Well, I don't know how to explain it, you know, but like, she helped me out in the shop, right? Have a look at shop. Okay. Why do you have to go to court about that? Did she steal stuff from you? No. Have a look at shop, and she come and help me out in the shop. And she always, you know, she come and she move around and she help me, and I give her a little sweetie and I give her little things and I top up her phone, and immediately, as a sex therapist, your antenna just went up. The minute you start telling me that, I'm waiting, my radar starts. So I said, okay, so what are you going to court for? Can you tell me what you're going to court for? And at this point I'm saying to him, look at the wall and tell me. You don't have to look at me. Look at the wall and tell me what you're going to court for. Well, it's like, you know, we were in the shop together, and the shop's small, right? And she was reaching across and she was getting some things from me, and my hand touched her there. My hand touched her there. Do you know that's how Jamaicans talk? Why the cutlass chop me, you know? You want to see the machete chop me? Say again? Yes, he's removed himself from the act. So he's also disassociating. Man, touch her there. So I said, where is there? In our lap. I said, your hand touched her in her lap? I said, show me exactly on your body where her lap is. He touched his genitals. I said, okay, so your hand touched her there. Well, I think I touched her, you know. I'm not sure I touched her. I said, what is she taking you to court for, or who's taking you to court? Our mother reel up, you know, and our mother said, I have to come out of the yard, I have to leave, I have to find a place, and I just one time, you know. I said, okay. Can you remember any other time that your hand might have touched her? Well, you know it's not one time. It took about 4 sessions to get the whole story out. He's been molesting this little girl since she was about 12. And the reason he has her in the shop is because he's interested in her sexually. And so he's been touching her up, and she went and told her mother. And her mother nearly killed him. So yes, he has to move. And he's come to me telling me about his dilemma because he has to move when he's in a spot. You get me? So he wants help because he has to move. So he feels this is very unjust because him hand touch her. And at one time became 2 times, became 3 times, became 4 times. It's like when a partner cheats on you and they tell you they had sex once. Don't believe that. That's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. Unless it's a random person that they buck up in a bush somewhere while they were walking past the person. It didn't happen once. Yeah, but they're first going to tell you that it happened once. Same thing with perpetrators. They don't give it a full story at the beginning. Now, this case has gone to court, and it should go to court. We have a duty of reporting in the medical sciences. So if you go to a doctor, if you go to a psychologist, etc., we have to report because you have to get help, you have to get treatment. Fortunately, this man told someone who was related to a nurse, and the nurse told us, and then they called and he came in. So he is coming in for treatment. But it's going to take a long time, just as it would for the victim, for him to come to the realization that the hand that touched her continuously is his hand. And that the hand is connected to his brain. And his brain told his hand to touch her. And that desire came from somewhere. Good? And that's what we have to get him to see in order for him to begin to even reach any point where we can assist him. So we must look at the entire system of abuse, which includes the perpetrator. Okay. Thank you.